you're at the session exploring challenges, getting on my phone, challenges and opportunities for council farmland to support new agroecological farmers. Very much welcome to everyone coming to this session, which is extremely important at this time. I think a really, really great topic. I'm Vicki Hurd. I'm head of farming campaign at Sustain, the Alliance for Better Food and Farming. And I'm chairing the session, and I will introduce the speakers, but I'm sure they'll say a bit more about themselves. But and you've got the biogs on the app. But I did want to say, this is such a critical issue. We have an opportunity now to use the county farm estate and publicly owned land, wider than the county farm estate, to actually really pioneer and promote and educate on agroecological farming systems that are truly resilient and building our resilience in our food supply for the biodiversity and climate challenges that we're facing, and other challenges. Obviously, we're also in a position now where the policy environment is changing very rapidly. We have an Agricultural Act, Environment Act, Trade Act, and they're all reflecting a very different scenario for trading, particularly trading and food and farming, since we decided to leave Europe. And there are a whole load of uncertainties, but new policies coming in place, particularly on farm policy, opportunities for farmers to use that policy to really do new things on their farm, and agroecological transition, ideally for farmers. But the county farm estate is a unique opportunity because it's owned by the councils, and they hold land for new entrants, for people to get progression through farming, to be able to understand how to do farming, to learn how to get bigger and better as a farming business. But also it should be now about learning new techniques, agroecological farming, learning how to protect the nature on the farm, tackle climate change, protect soils, etc., and provide an education resource and an engagement resource for the community. So there's huge opportunities ahead, and we're going to hear about that today. And we'll also hear about the challenges. A lot of county farms have been sold off as local authorities are undergoing huge austerity measures over the last 10 years. They've had to sell off farms, or they've been encouraged to sell off farms to raise money for other needs. So that is a risk, and it's happened, and I'm sure Graeme will tell us about that because he's been doing some research and he'll be talking about what he's found through that research. But we should also see this as an opportunity to really celebrate the county farm and county land as an opportunity going forward to really have a renaissance in peri-urban food growing, etc. And there's also the pressures that Brexit has brought in terms of jobs, and so looking at how county farms could encourage people to be working in farming, and giving that as a positive way to encourage people into farming and into the food system. And we've also got the challenges of new trade agreements, which are going to put pressure on our farmers. So as a very uncertain environment in which we're talking, but this is very much a session about the opportunities and how we can grasp those opportunities going forward, and local authorities in particular. I hope some are in the room, and we'll be hearing from Cornwall and from Defra about those opportunities and interesting policies that have been pursued, and that'll be really exciting. So without any further chat from me, I'm very pleased to be introducing Graeme Willis, agricultural lead at CPRE, and I was going to read a bit more about your bio, but not too much, because I've known Graeme for a very long time, possibly more than anybody, working in farm policy, and he's been doing this for a very long time, maybe. And he joined CPRE in 2006, and he's managed and published research on local food webs across England, and many more reports and issues around farming, smaller farms, agroecological management, soils, hedgerows. Got a huge background. I think it's too long to say it all. I won't with further ado introduce Graeme to talk about the new research he's done and why CPRE is working with others on this issue. Thanks very much, Graeme.
Thanks, Vicki. I'm going to share my screen. I do want to talk about the challenges. That's okay. I do want to talk about the challenges and opportunities. Most of what I say will build on work I've done with Kim, who's joined us today. We're delighted to see Kim, and Kate Swade from Shared Assets, and Chris Williams at the New Economic Foundation, so partners in this project. And that work includes our 2019 report, Reviving County Farms. So this presentation draws on the follow-on project as well, which was to develop a new compelling vision for council farms and how they might be by 2040. And I want to explore findings from workshops we did with council estate officers, including Jonny here, and with Henry, who's also joined us, with tenants and prospective farmers, plus background research, and look at the challenges, but also some of the opportunities, as Vicki outlined, in sort of new policy setting we have, and that much needed policy change could bring. I think I will probably concentrate more on the context and the challenges, and no doubt we'll hear more very much from the others about the new opportunities at council and national level and in urban areas. So briefly a structure that I'll talk about the challenging context ahead, the issues of access to land, specific issues and challenges for council farmland, which we identified, why and how council farms we think are special, and some new analysis and data on that. And then a very brief canter through our vision, which is yet to be published, but will be soon. And then some of the policy changes, which I think would make those opportunities real for new farmers, agroecological farmers, regenerative farmers. And then if I have time, some next steps for our project. That was me. So Don Curry recognised that in his foreword for our vision that farming faces a level of change not seen for perhaps a century. I think when we talked about Brexit, most of us were seeing it as a generational change. But as Vicki said, there are many more things that have come down the track since. And we know about the change from direct payments, BPS, to the new environmental land management schemes and the implication that has for encouraging change in farming, but also prompting farmers to change or pushing them even. But there are other new factors which have come into play. So we know there are border controls which have affected the ability to import and export food, new trade deals which could indeed undercut prices, makes competition more severe over time and challenge UK food standards. There are pandemic shocks and after waves, and we're still living through many of those. Those include resource shortages, price hikes affecting fuel, materials, labour, fertilizers, which farming is feeling intensely, and new demands from lockdown on the countryside itself and what it can provide for us as citizens. So for our health and our well-being, access, and a more resilient, less fragile food supply chain. And lastly, as Becky Spate made clear yesterday, we now widely accept that the biodiversity crisis and achieving net zero are intertwined and critical and urgent and threaten not only our quality of life, but the underpinnings of our food production. So in some ways, it's farming faces challenges that any of us could be forgiven for thinking would make farming not a very attractive proposition to go into. But I think conversely, flipping that on its head, those crises can concentrate our minds. And I think for some, at least, that suggests, I'd like to test this proposition, that for some people, producing food in ways that sustain and restore our health, restore nature's health, and restore planetary health is in fact an extremely noble thing to do and a very important profession to go into. So there is demand and interest in going to farming for very, very good reasons and doing the right kind of farming. The Defra Future of Farming report in 2013 recognised that, in fact, going into farming in your own right and starting your own business would be very difficult for many and only possible for the very few. And I think it meant by that the very privileged few who came from farming families with land available. And there are key facts that support that they refer to, and I've put out here, set out here in more detail. So farmland prices, many will know, have tripled since 2001. In fact, we now know from Savills that fewer than half of farmers in 2020 were farm buyers. Lettings have stagnated since 2003, so that's for farm business tenancies. And those in turn have become shorter in the last 10 years, so down to just 3 to 4.5 years. Very difficult if you want to establish yourself in a new business with that kind of tenancy. And most farm business tenancies are for land only. So this is based on Central Agricultural Associated Agricultural Valuers data. They're not for equipped farms with homes or buildings, which new people into farming need some of those for certain types of farming or most types of farming. And lastly, we've seen business consolidation. In that 10-year period, we lost 25,000 smaller farms under 50 hectares in England alone, which is a challenge for anyone wanting to get into the sector. So council farms, as Don Curry recognised in 2008 in his really important report on council farms, is an important strategic national asset. and as the Thurston report in 2013 for Defra recognises, are a crucial entry point for new farmers. And they are still a really significant area of land, 98,000 hectares from reports to Parliament across England and Wales. But those farms, as Vicki mentioned, are at risk. So we've seen a halving of the area since 1970. That graph, in fact, Guy Shrubsole's graph shows falling down from around 450,000 acres in the 70s down to about 200,000 in the most recent period in old million acres. So also we've seen this aggregation of holdings, the dispersal and disposal of holdings, 10,000 fewer farm holdings in councils since the 1960s. And what's somewhat more worrying, and this comes from our Reviving County Farms report we published in 2019, those net losses have accelerated in England, down from around 0.5% of the remaining total per year to 2%, and that's 2,000 hectares per annum. So in the last 4 years, and tenancies have gone down a third in England since 2010. So that's just the graph from Guy's, which gives you a more dramatic illustration of that reduction in council farms. So there are key issues and challenges for farmland, which I want to pick up on that we identified, and I think a useful insight into the challenges councils indeed face in making the best use of their farms and the best use of their land, as many will want to do. So local authorities have faced continued austerity since 2010 and huge budget pressures driving farm sales. So the National Audit Office, on their figures, councils to 2017-18 lost 50% of their core government funding, and that pushed them to sell farms to balance their books, to provide short-term finance. But short-termism is also a political thing. Councils can change, political party and control changes very swiftly. And one of the problems is that council members aren't necessarily well advised, or sorry, not well advised. They don't necessarily understand well the complexities of farming and the value of the farmland that's been held for generations in those councils. Colin Tudge, the great Colin Tudge, has said certainly that farmers deal with natural systems as complex as the human body and as medicine does for the human body, but actually we value the NHS hugely, but only spend 2 to 3 billion on our farming in this country. So we have poor understanding, I think, of the value of farming and its potential and for land use. And that's exacerbated by a disconnect between the public and farming. It doesn't help. The public may not understand why their council farms really matter and should be valued. Fourthly, there's a conflict between management for finance and other purposes. So professional management of council estates is vital, and their financial returns matter greatly as income streams, and for reinvestment in those estates indeed. But value must be a broader concept. And now indeed, as we've said earlier, the narrative of public goods and environmental services is really well established. And it should, value of these assets should reflect those other benefits to society. But we currently lack the tools and the policy to value council farms and council farmland generally as holistically as we need to do and fully as we need to do. And lastly, and I think this is, again, links to where we are with national policy, there's a real complexity of integrating land use with other policies. So in national terms, we see that environmental services, public goods as they're called, are now being embedded in national agricultural policy. And in other areas of policy, we see it in local nature recovery strategies and so forth for councils. But the recognition of this in council farm strategies is lacking and lagging. And indeed, I think currently in other national institutional estates like the Crown Estate and things like the Ministry of Defence. So there's some new statistics I want to present, which I think, because I'm probably sounding relentlessly negative at this point, but actually show how important council farms are, acre for acre, and disproportionately for their size. So I mentioned 98,000 hectares. That's 1% of the farmed area in England and Wales, and about 2.5% of the let area. And for that, council farms offer so much more than the area that they actually have. So more than 1 in 10 of new tenancies. This is really important for new people getting into farming and democratising access and broadening access. They offer over 12% of the total farmland let. I should say this is 2019 data. You can see this stretching back through the earlier periods. On average, the tenancies, this is my analysis, the tenancies they offer are 2 years longer than the average of any other landowner type of institutional private landowners. 1 in 6 of all lettings to new entrants, I'm sure we'll consider what does a new entrant, how do we define a new entrant, but by the CAAV definitions. And lastly, 2/5, there are relatively small numbers, that's why I put it in fifths, the 2/5 of all equipped farms. So as I said, those with buildings and a home, many other lets, 90% are bare land, which is not easy if you want to set up certain types of farming where you need stock, you need materials, you need to store them, and you need fodder. So I think these are really important reasons why council farms matter hugely, why they have a disproportionate impact. And they're reasons how council farms are special and deliver something special. But I want to explore some more qualitative reasons why council farms are special, and more conceptual reasons, I think, fitting in with this policy situation or policy context. So government's playing a leadership role in transforming farming and resetting farming policy to enable farming to change and to adapt to those critical environmental and other challenges we've mentioned. But that policy shift is also kicking in at the council level with local nature recovery strategies now as part of the Environment Act, and unitary authorities and county council will have to deploy that and build a nature recovery network. But many councils themselves have also declared climate emergencies and have climate action change plans and strategies. And again, Cornwall, I should say, and Jonny, no doubt will talk about this, are leading on this. So it would be logical for national and local government to use its own land as an exemplar of delivering this change, to walk the walk. Let us remember that the ELM policy, so important and announced recently in more detail by the Secretary of State, is a voluntary initiative. It seeks in parts of it to achieve 70% coverage of farming. But this is voluntary, depends on incentives and the detail, the attractiveness. But councils own the land they have and can deploy that ownership to work with their tenants, to manage it in different ways and drive change, to walk the walk, which is so important in these times, to accelerate change and make things happen. Secondly, I think a really important role, and councils have a convening role way beyond what private estates could offer, because they connect with businesses, with health systems, with education, with the care sector. And I think also through things like local procurement, local dynamic procurement, support different suppliers from different local suppliers into their facilities. And that could help support their supply chains of council farms and their viability. But also they could support things like community supported farms, direct box schemes, farmers markets as well. So a real role for councils in bringing together and integrating their wider objectives with their council farm estates. And I've mentioned the disproportionate value for rejuvenation of the sector. It's so important that council farm structures are smaller farms with land and buildings and homes, which mean they can do a very important public service in driving new people, bringing new people into farming, into the sector, and de-risking that supply and pipeline of new tenants into the sector generally to enable change, agroecological and regenerative forms of farming, but also into the wider farming sector, people move on. And lastly, there's a kind of logic to public goods policy where the government is investing in, nationally, large sums of money, 2.4 billion annually, in changing the way farming is done. But it seems odd that we don't see this happening, or this not being understood for municipal farmland. It doesn't seem logical that local farmland in councils shouldn't be deploying the same public goods policy and valuing their land and their use of it in ways that not only support new entrants, not only bring in financial rewards to the council, but also deliver the wider public benefits that's part of national policy. So I will counter through in the last few minutes our new vision, which is yet to be published, as I mentioned, but will be in the next month, I so hope, and to give a quick flavour of it and what it recommends. So it's a new positive vision to recognise the value of council farms in the 21st century, so important, to rejuvenate their purpose and to support the advocacy to put in place long-term protection funding and support to make them flourish. And part of that is certainly showing the challenges that councils face. But what we've done is looked at the issues for councils, very importantly, but also for the farming sector, familiar things like the ageing of the farmer sector, but also the difficulty of access I've mentioned, and also the importance for local people and issues for them in terms of transparency, the information they have about their council farms and how they can be connected to and engage with development of those estates. The vision sets out how council farms could work better for each of these in a series of statements and an overview. And then we have 10 key policy recommendations to make it real. It's a really important policy time, as Vicki pointed out. So we've set out, I hope, what is optimistic in terms of vision. And I'll just talk through some of the key aspects of what that secure and thriving future for council farms could look like, and delivering better opportunities for new farmers and growers, but also greater public benefits to local people and beyond.
1 minute, Graeme, if you can.
Okay, I'm really there. So these themes marry with the key issues we've mentioned and also the main policy recommendations. So the purpose for council farms needs to be unified nationally and to tie into local, national and supranational issues. As you see in the first statement there, the purpose, there is a need for new integrated strategies to bring all the public benefits together in understanding and valuing what farmland can deliver multifunctionally. We need tools to assess public value, a new public value framework. I think there's a need for sustained investment beyond the 2 years Henry will talk about for the new entrant scheme, right up to 2028 and beyond, to allow structures to be altered and new schemes to be offered to train and skill up new people into farming. And there is so much more to say. Those are some of the policy recommendations. But just briefly to finish off, I think that there are great signs that government is investing now in changes to national policy and in farming. And if it could work with local government in partnership with tenants and local communities to put in place that new shared purpose, frameworks for value and sustained investment, then we have leave to hope that this irreplaceable asset will go on to be protected, but also fundamentally revitalised to create better opportunities and greater benefits for generations to come. I'll end there to give us time to for my colleagues. Thank you.
Graeme, thank you very much. That was a fantastic rattle through a very, very critical issue and some really, really great points made there. I'll go straight on to Kim and then we'll have a few clarification questions after that because there are a few coming in. Kim is the research coordinator at Shared Assets, as Graeme said, working with CPRE and NEF on this work. And Shared Assets, fantastic organisation I've been working with, think and do tank, working to create a socially just future through practical projects that build new relationships between people and the land. I really would recommend everybody have a look at their website and what they're doing. It's brilliant. I'll hand over straight to Kim. Thank you. 15 minutes.
Thanks so much, Vicki. I'll do my best. Let me just share my screen. I've been asked today to do a bit of a focus on another project that relates very strongly to this theme of council farmland, but with a particular emphasis on the peri-urban regions. And so Shared Assets is working on this project called Fringe Farming, which is a collaboration between ourselves, Sustain, Vicki and colleagues, also the Land Workers Alliance, and some more localized partners, which I'll get onto in a minute. But as it says there, the Fringe Farming project is a collaborative project to understand the barriers, identify land opportunities and local actions, and as well as developing national level policy to enable agroecological farming on the fringes of cities as part of a green economic recovery, and touching on many of those themes that Graeme was already talking about. And this kind of came to be through a sort of pilot project that we did in London in 2020. And then the first phase of the project that we've been doing throughout this year has involved Bristol, Sheffield and Glasgow. So we've been working with Bristol food producers in Bristol, obviously, Glasgow Community Food Network and Chef Food and Regather in Sheffield. And then, like I said, the Land Workers Alliance have also been involved at that kind of more policy level, which I'll get onto. And basically, just let me move my slide. So yeah, what we've done in the project so far is we've followed this sort of process whereby we do some research and we produce a briefing on summarising the key information available for that city around food growing, around employment and training, issues like food poverty, but also taking a look into a lot of the sort of council and other kind of influential organisations, some of the key commitments that they have around things like biodiversity, climate change, climate emergency, things that Graeme already mentioned, but also things like health and education, and kind of drawing out some of those key commitments to see how they will maybe relate to the, the fringe farming that we're talking about reinvigorating. And we also try and put in some inspiring examples from elsewhere in the world, because there are plenty, and that can sometimes spark a bit of energy and enthusiasm around things. So once we kind of have that research together, we organise a kind of tailored workshop in each of the cities. And you can see this one in Glasgow, which we were lucky enough to have in person in September, which is a rare treat these days. But basically each of those workshops has involved some sort of kind of visioning activities of lots of stakeholders coming together to work out, well, what would our city look like if fringe farming, if peri-urban farming in an agroecological way was really to take hold? What would that look like? And then also to plan activities to get us from that sort of dream situation to how things are now, and kind of work out what each person or each organisation that came to the workshop could do themselves to move things ahead. So after the workshops, we tend to update the initial briefing documents and include some of those key asks and actions for each city, and we share those publicly. Sustain has been kind enough to host those on their website, and I can put the links in after I finished talking. The Glasgow one has just gone up, and they're well worth a look if you're interested. And then alongside these kind of workshops, the Land Workers Alliance has also been hosting these practitioner forums to bring together other kind of interested stakeholders from across the country, whether those be kind of people interested in farming or growing, but other stakeholders as well, so that we can have a good idea of some of the key issues that might hold back peri-urban farming from being more widespread, and can create good policy solutions for that as well. So that's going on kind of at the same time. And across our work in all three cities, there's definitely been, I'd say, some similar challenges, but definitely also opportunities, which I'll just go into here a bit briefly. So the number one challenge, I think, is about getting access to land, but specifically for this project, information about land that could be accessible in some way. And this is, since we're talking about council farmland in particular, I mean, it's one thing, private land is a whole other issue, but you would think maybe that for council land there might be some good kind of records because there's some sort of public accountability there, but actually it's incredibly hard to find that information. Where it does exist, it's often not detailed enough to give a sort of geographic mapped location. It might just be, sort of like a named farm or something, you don't really know where that is. Never mind, sort of some of the more practical information that could be useful if you're actually thinking about growing, like what sort of soil is it, or all sorts of other kind of climatic or geomorphological conditions that would be useful to know about. So that's very difficult. But we recognise, obviously, as Graeme has gone into, lots of issues about councils being under-resourced since the sort of period of austerity. So we know that it's a huge amount of work for councils to, get together and maintain those sort of records, but they are absolutely vital. And part of it's kind of hampered by the fact that it's often the information is held across lots of different departments, which don't always talk to each other. So maybe some bits of land might be under the sort of purview of housing or highways or parks or lots of other different departments. So yeah, it can be hard to get all that information together in one place and have the right information there to be used for kind of thinking about farming purposes, basically. So yeah, you really, to be able to make change, you need to get the information there, but also the people who have the knowledge about what would be needed from a farming perspective, and not just at the officer sort of level, but at the decision-making or budgetary level as well. Those people all need to kind of be in the room, and we've tried our best to do that through workshops, but people are very stretched for capacity, so it's not always easy. But there is huge potential if these sort of challenges can be overcome, and if this sort of more holistic view can be taken. There is land at the edge of cities to produce food agroecologically at scale. And I think the at scale point is critical, because I think it's a really crucial transition zone, the peri-urban area. It can be the point at which people from cities who maybe have had a little bit of experience in community gardening or just in their own gardens or things like that, if they're interested in farming, can take the next step to kind of work at more of a field scale or a commercial scale, but it's still close to where they live and things like that. And also in terms of getting new people into farming and people from non-farming backgrounds, but also we know that farming is one of the least racially diverse sectors in the UK. So if we're looking to get people of colour into farming and from other sorts of backgrounds as well, you know, having the proximity to the land and to where people live and feel comfortable, you know, and have those kind of community connections, that's crucial. So that's another opportunity that the peri-urban sort of sphere offers. Also, obviously, in cities, there's sometimes, you know, people who are facing real food poverty as well. And it's good that if those people also can have a connection, not just to being able to access the, you know, the green space and have the sort of health benefits that Graeme talked about again, but also to have more empowering ways to engage with the food system than, you know, things like food banks. So there's potential for not just for the production side of things, but things like community kitchens, to kind of bring people together around food and build community as well. And yeah, Graeme already mentioned dynamic procurement as well. I think there's real opportunities to get small scale farmers to have, you know, a kind of market on their doorstep in terms of hospitals, schools, things like that, if they can get into those systems and in a supported way, basically. So yeah, overall, I think there's just real opportunities for council farmland, particularly on the edge of cities, to tackle these multiple objectives that councils are already signed up to, and are maybe looking for ways to bring different things together, whether it's health and well-being, you know, food, local jobs, biodiversity and climate change targets. They've already committed to these things, and in many of the ways that Graeme just described, we see this council farmland, especially around the edge of cities, as a real sweet spot for this. So in terms of the Fringe Farming project, we have now got funding to run it for another year. So our phase 2 will be starting in 2022. And this year, we're also going to bring in Cardiff, and we're working with Food Sense Wales there, so expanding to another city. But for the existing cities, we'll be continuing to support them in their action plans, trying to take forward some of those steps that came out of the workshops, but also trying to produce resources which could be used for other cities that wanted to maybe take forward this process. So things like business cases, which can be really useful for convincing those council decision makers, but also things to do with policy and just kind of being more vocal about the way we've run this process and the workshops and the kind of action research approach that we've taken. So yeah, watch this space basically, and happy to take any questions. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Kim. That's great. A very quick run through what it has been a great project, and I've been involved in that as well. It's been really inspiring to see what can be achieved, but also the barriers are very real, particularly on land, but particularly knowing who's in control of that. And even if you've got a really positive council in one part of the council, they don't talk to the other part, and I've really witnessed that. So be interesting to hear Jonny later how they've managed to overcome that. There have been a few questions, and Graeme's been doing great work answering some of those. One of the themes that has come up in the questions was about how do we campaign? Can we ask for something more concrete than just the positive? We want these county farms to be maintained and grow and deliver the kind of outcomes that you're talking about. Do we need to get into the local elections and make it a peak part of the elections? That's an interesting area. I don't know if either of you want to talk about that. That would be one to talk about first. Specific demands we can make on government. Ollie Roker's asked that. Could they actually stop selling them off, or require them to divide up the size of holdings so there's more of them, for instance? Don't know if either of you want to take on those two issues.
I'm going to let you go first, since you've
Okay,
got the vision.
Well, we actually called for halt sales in the Reviving County Farms report in advance of the Agriculture Act. Yeah, but there is a lot of resistance, because there could be a fire sale of those county farm assets if such a measure came in. So it certainly was pushed back in the Agriculture Act. And I guess we have to think, is regulation the right way forward? But we are making some very specific recommendations in Ollie in the report. So it isn't just one word. It's very much investment really matters, though. I think that's a way that you can incentivize really interesting initiatives in councils and long-term investment. So we're calling for far more investment, which will really matter in making the changes. And that then I think will allow councils to restructure, invest, develop the smaller scale farms that might be much better for agroecological and horticulture type approaches, and get many more people onto the land and developing new opportunities. But there are also things we've talked about in terms of information that Kim mentioned, which is so important. So much better reporting requirements on what land councils hold, and information about that land, either annually and nationally and more locally, but also a duty to have a net gain actually of land, and enabling. I think we've come to the view that councils need to be able to sell some of their land at the right opportunity, but then it should be, some of that should be reinvested in expanding their estates, so they're not just static. I'll stop there to give other people a chance.
Very good points. Kim, do you want to add anything on that?
No, I think I would just encourage people to read the vision, because it does get much more specific. So look out for that when it comes out. Sounds
like some cracking recommendations. I've been thinking about whether we should have a land transparency award for the council that does the most to actually make clear what land it does have ownership of or power over, and that's not just county estates, but as Kim was talking about, other land assets. And that refers to a question that somebody else has asked about, can we use other land, not part of the farm estate, to be offered for a CSA, for instance? That Lisa Dunn has asked that question. Do you think that's possible?
Yeah, I can come in on that a bit. And in fact, we're working on a project, another project in Wales at the minute, where we're kind of doing exactly that. We've really expanded it beyond the what you would call county farms, maybe, to just council farmland. Because for someone, you know, just starting out, or even for other purposes, more sort of social purposes, a much smaller piece of land, something like half a hectare, half an acre, it's, you know, a good place to start. So, and there might well be pockets of that land even around, you know, council offices or other sort of pieces of land that they have. So yeah, definitely, I would say, as the answer to that, we should be open to that as well.
Yeah. Can I come in, Vicky, on that?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, I framed this as council farmland. I mean, we did the first report as reviving county farms, but the term's quite complex and confusing. So we've called it council farmland. So that should include both classic county small housing estates, but other land as well. Councils like Enfield have land that isn't in those small housing estates. And again, very difficult to find out where that land is and what's holdings, like Kim was saying, but that very much should be part of this, where it's feasible and practical, and that land can be used really well for growing food as well as more classic farming.
Great.
Vicky, if I can just come in from a council perspective, it's interesting to hear people talk about how councils manage their broad estates. You know, Cornwall's got 24,000 acres of land in the county, of which 10,500 acres is its agricultural estate. So you can see that we hold land for a whole raft of other reasons: education, social services, highways, etc. So it can be we're very broad estate, and we are siloed naturally by the way that we seek to manage within budgets and within service objectives. The presentation of local authority assets to the public is a really difficult one. We're required to make some annual statements. Our challenge is, if we make too much information available, it can lead to some of the antisocial activity, which we try and prevent. So at the same time as wanting to make information transparent, at the same time, in too much transparency leads to issues.
Tricky.
So there's always a balance that we're playing there. We're not, I don't believe local authorities are trying to hide assets from the public. Sometimes in making it absolutely open, we create more problems than we face. So that's just a balance, really, and a recognition of some points that Kim and Graeme have made, that yes, it'd be lovely that we be really open, but it doesn't always play to the right audience and doesn't always give the right access that we're perhaps we're looking to give.
Yeah. Thank you. And we'll hear more from you in a minute, which is great. We probably should move on. There's some good chat in the chat and some more questions if either of Graeme or Kim want to answer them, if you can. I mean, one point has been made, which you don't need to respond to, but I think it's quite interesting. When so many people from Gates downwards buying up land for the investment opportunities and the opportunities that it provides in all sorts of ways. It seems a shame why a local authority is selling them off, but that's just a comment, and it's an interesting one. But let's move on to Henry, who's from Defra. I'm very pleased to have Henry with us today. He's head of new entrant support policy at Defra, previously worked on food innovation and water management policy, amongst other things, and been a practicing economist and policy analyst for over 25 years, working on environment policy. I'll leave it there. You can read the rest of his bio in the app. Thank you very much for being with us, Henry, and very much look forward to hearing from you.
Hi, Vicki and everyone, and thanks very much for inviting me. It's great to be here, and hopefully we can have a good discussion about what we're trying to do in terms of supporting new entrants into land-based businesses. And we specifically on purpose talk about land-based businesses, not to limit what we might be thinking of to, you know, farmers have a bit sort of view of what a farmer is or what a horticulturalist is. And as I think a lot of the discussions at this event have indicated, the future may be about diversification, mixed farming, where actually a lot of different things are going on. And even I think models which we've seen recently, which are really interesting, where you have a whole range of different businesses on an estate which interact in interesting ways. So different people are doing, say, a mobile dairy or growing arable land or chickens and so forth. So the future we see as one of many possibilities. And so a lot about this supporting innovation, new entrants is about innovation, fresh ideas, different ways of doing things in the context of these huge challenges we face, both environmentally and in terms of the different economic context post-EU exit. So there are huge numbers of challenges and opportunities, we think, and by bringing fresh thinking, new ideas, different ways of organizing businesses, entrepreneurial capacities in that maybe don't exist as much and not the sort of core thing that you learn in an agricultural college, we can make a real difference. So we started out on this journey back in November in 2019 when the Agricultural Transition Plan was published, and since then we've been doing co-design, which I know has become a sort of the word, but which really means listening, talking to lots of people, having good discussions and so forth. So we had a co-design steering group, so we tried to get a really diverse set of people who had an interest, who might be part of delivering, people who were recent new entrants or were planning to be new entrants, but also people who supported over many years, different organizations who support new entrants, who know what works and what doesn't work. And also, obviously, council farms being a key member of them, but they also having the land and other landowners as well, because one of the key things was that we need to go beyond council farms, that they actually are an important part, but there obviously is, as Graeme has showed, a reduction in the amount of land that council farms have. And actually we found lots of other landowners are open and interested in new people with different ideas to do different things, because they also see that the world, the context is changing. And so people, you know, the old style standard economic model of large plots of land with a lot of capital and hardly any people, and basically trying to spread a fixed capital over as much land as possible. That is maybe not what the future standard successful economic model looks like. So what came out of these many conversations, webinars, workshops, and so on? Well, the broad sort of story is that people did need this entrepreneurial support, but also we needed to reach out to a wider set of people who maybe not traditionally come from a farming background, to develop this new set of people who might not be necessarily young, could be a lot of entrepreneurs actually start a new career in their 50s, to get them into the land-based business space. But the key barriers people saw were, well, land, we talk a lot about land, but not just any old land, land with the right facilities, the right infrastructure, and also the right terms and conditions. And actually there, I think there's very interesting potential from share farming, where actually you're not fixed to a small individual plot, but are able to range and have some sort of relationship with a wide range of land, which links quite neatly to sort of agroecological methodologies. But beyond land, finance is obviously a key thing, a key barrier, a key challenge, because new people coming in can be seen as more risky and aren't likely to have the assets available to guarantee any loans that they may have. And I think we're still trying to explore what sort of new money there could be. I think maybe green finance is a possible space, but also there are some models we've seen where in a sort of incubator unit, the estate actually provides both land and finance. So where we're at now, what we really want to do is next, and the Secretary of State announced this at the Oxford Farming Conference. I'm not sure if you mentioned the other conference at this conference, but it's a bit like the other place in Parliament.
We do. We're very friendly with each other. Yeah.
Oh, good. Okay. So at the Oxford Farming Conference, our Secretary of State, in a response to questions, announced that our next steps, which we discussed with him before Christmas, were moving to actually piloting, to seeing what works, and in particular seeing with Council Farms as a key player in these next steps. So I'm great to have Jonny Alford on the panel here as well. So at the moment we're working out what that might mean. Our initial thinking is some sort of accelerator program of support to develop entrepreneurial capacity, which fits with the feedback and what we've learned, but maybe relatively short and sharp in order to try and pilot it and get some feedback and learn from it, rather than the sort of longer term support that people have been talking about in the past, and see if we can get a number of groups around the country trialing that. But we're still sort of exploring possibilities there, and obviously we'll need to get feedback from our people we've been working on the co-design, and from internally in Defra and the Secretary of State and so on, of exactly how this might work. So early stages, and any thoughts or recommendations for how you might run a pilot, very much appreciated. But we hope to, in early spring, actually set out in more detail how these might work, and how we'll take that piloting process forward.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. I've got lots of questions myself. I'm sure there'll be some from the panelists and participants. That's really exciting. And spring, you say it would probably be starting. That's very exciting.
I didn't say starting.
Oh, sorry. Sorry.
Oh, come on, we are government, Vicki. Come on.
I know.
We'll be actually giving some more detail, sort of how it's really going to work.
It's going to work.
I think people seem to suggest that the best time to do this sort of thing is over the winter when it's quieter and so forth, but we also need to fit in with the sort of processes of people like Council Farms and timing and so on. So that the pilots actually, in terms of really happening live with people on them and so forth, maybe over next winter, because most of the people who might be on it, we're working in the farmland, in land-based businesses, which tend to be a little bit busy, I understand.
Around spring, absolutely, yes, absolutely. Having been working on the Elms pilots, I know it takes a while also to develop it, and the co-creation takes time, but we'll hear something in spring. That's really useful to know. Thank you very much. Now we're going to hear from Jonny Alford, a rural practice surveyor working in Cornwall for the Unitary Authority. Really pleased to have you with us, Jonny. There's a very long bio with a lot of really fantastic experience, I have to say. Once a trainee land agent, now finds himself called a strategic property lead, and the council manages 10,800 acres of agricultural estate. I'm sure we'll hear more from Jonny anyway, so I won't talk anymore. Please go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Vicki. Yeah, I was once a young, fully haired land agent working day to day on the farms, and now find myself sat behind a desk. Strategic property lead, and if somebody knows what that is, I'd love to hear. But I still keep my fingers heavily involved in the farm's estate, and so that does just give me the opportunity to shape a little bit what's happening with the Cornwall Council farm estate. And over the 30 years that I've been with Cornwall, I have shaped 3 strategies for Cornwall. Hopefully, I'm sharing a screen now, and let me take you to some of the slide detail that hopefully is relevant here. So Graeme's already touched on some of this. You know, we have 40 active local authority estates, 40 council farm estates, 2,500 let opportunities, 1,700 actual tenants. So, you know, some tenants have more than one opportunity. They might have a fully equipped farm with some bare land as a separate letting. So that's why there are more lettings than tenants. And the area that we're managing, 195,000 acres, is quite significant, and Graeme's really helpful summary of how that sits within a wider context. You know, 2.5% of the let estate, you know, 1 in 10 let farm sector. Really powerful data. There's Cornwall's figures on the side. 10,500 let acres. We've got about 250 acres of additional woodland, 108 lettings. Last year, we let 4 new tenants onto the estate with new opportunities. But what's interesting is that we've still got 27 tenants who started up with us before 1995, when we moved from the old Agricultural Holdings Act lifetime stroke retirement tenancies onto fixed term tenancies. And so there's still quite a legacy. That's 25 years ago, some of those joined our estate. Local authority farms estates have a statutory basis, but we have to go back to 1970 for that legislation, and that's why
Jonny, can I just ask you to make your slides full screen? Yes. Is that all right?
Apologies.
Sorry.
Yeah,
that's okay, just for the future viewing of it.
Yep. Okay, is that better?
Thank you. That's better. Yeah.
Okay, so 1970 Agriculture Act, and we need to go back to 1908, the first legislation around council farms. But 1970, local authorities were given a discretionary obligation to deliver a statutory small holdings estates. That means they can choose to do it if they want to. There is no government obligation on us to deliver local authority farms in the way there are around education, highways, etc. But if we choose to hold an agricultural estate and manage it as a small holdings authority, then what we're required to do is have regard to the general interests of agriculture and good estate management. And that's an incredibly broad brief as far as I read it. Agriculture is phenomenally broad, and good estate management covers a whole raft of activity and is everything from your well-managed, well-run dairy farm through to small growing opportunities, as far as I read it. So the canvas that we can paint on is broad. I do feel that we have followed the agricultural dictum of the 1990s and the early 2000s and become, larger holdings, smaller number of opportunities, and we have followed that. And it's interesting to hear right at the introduction how the changing world, perhaps it will cause us as a local authority managers to rethink what our estates can do locally. And I'm hoping that some of this conversation, today's session, that the work that Graeme's doing, the work that we've been doing with Defra will begin to help us rethink that. Make it our general aim to provide opportunities for persons to be farmers in their own right. So this expectation about creating opportunity for people to farm in their own account, not under some form of wider management arrangement, but farming in their own account by letting holdings to them. And so some of the other opportunities which perhaps exist in the agricultural world, share farming, etc., maybe don't naturally fit with us, but that's why we hold these estates, for the interests of agriculture and good estate management in our local authority areas, to provide opportunities by letting holdings to people. Now, How does Cornwall, I think this is where we come a Cornwall perspective. I need to put aside the other 39 local authorities, because this is a Cornwall perspective on how we manage our agricultural estate. 2019, we formalised this through our governance structures, our cabinet structures. And we've established 4 clear ambitions for the Cornwall estate. There's a farming futures ambition. Now that is all about creating those opportunities, complying with that 1970 obligation of the Agriculture Act, farming opportunities and food opportunities, food sitting at the centre of what we're doing, the expectation that our tenants will be farming tenants growing food, and that in the majority they will start as new entrants, which is our USP. That's what council farms really offer, that new entrant opportunity, that first rung into farming. We are a landlord which takes a risk around new entrants. We take I use the expression young people because they tend to be young people. They're not always young people, but we take people who have got limited credibility in a farming context, limited background, limited business pedigree, and we give them that opportunity to prove themselves within the context of a let agricultural farm. And so farming future sits at the very centre of what we do. Environmental growth then becomes our second ambition, that we will move the estate from the environmental standards that we've got and benchmark that we've got, and that we will improve, that we will enhance, that we will protect the environments that sit within our agricultural estates. And we will do that through a range of activities, whole farm plans, identifying where natural capital exists and putting in place management arrangements to enhance that. And so that environmental growth sits right alongside that theme of food and farming and new entrant ambition. Vibrant communities then begins to point, I think, where perhaps many people in this conversation are thinking, how can we get more out of our farms estate? You know, Cornwall has 92 farming tenants at the moment. How can we increase that number so that more people get the benefit of being part of the council farms estate? And so it's interesting that whilst when I put these 4 ambitions together, I always felt that the vibrant communities might be the smallest of the ambitions that we would deliver over. In fact, over the last 2 years, it's been the one which has been the most exciting and the most advanced. So we're now working at, just because of the way that a farm came available at the end of 2019, a farm did come available in a small rural coastal parish, and we've been working there with the local community to establish a new entrant farmer into the farm, and that's farmland and farm buildings only, because the farmhouse was really beyond our economic repair. And so we've offered a young local couple an opportunity to farm in their own right, to move away from renting fields here and everywhere, lambing all of their sheep in a friend's double garage, to now having a set of fixed buildings, but also working with the community to develop 2 fields into community fields for growing, for an orchard, a link to the local primary school. So begin to see how we can stretch how a council farm can work. So that vibrant community things becomes then sort of a real added benefit to the Cornwall estate. And then finally, it needs to be sustainable. It needs to be sustainable from a financial perspective. And whilst it would be lovely if local authorities were not constrained by financials, we seem to be more constrained by financial realities than anybody else. We need to generate revenue surplus. We need to cover our costs. And we need to balance and manage our capital investment as well. So we need to be a financially sustainable estate, and also sustainable in the wider sense of the environment, and seeing the estate grow in those ecosystems and environmental protection. So those are our 4 ambitions, and every single decision that we're making on the farms estate today, we are trying to balance those 4 ambitions, not favouring one over the other, but balancing them as best we can to take the estate forward with our 10,800 acres, our 10,500 acres of let land, and our current 92 opportunities. We will see, I think, the number of opportunities reduce on the estate over the coming years, and I'll touch on that in a minute. But of fixed, fully equipped holdings, but I hope to see more opportunities generally, and I'll touch on that as we go on. So So perhaps what does a council farm tenant look like? And rather than to put up a picture of what they might look like, I wanted to use 5 words. And this almost sits at the very heart of our evaluation process as we offer new opportunities. We need our farm tenants to be technically at the very top end of the range, the technical ability and understanding to deliver their farming practice. We have to have the very best because of the challenges of farming, especially when the acreages are lower than the average across the industry. Therefore, the technical ability to get everything from that holding is vital. So technically very strong. We look for a business plan which is appropriate to the farm or the farmland that we are letting, and then the financial base sufficient to deliver that business plan. It's no good having an all singing all dancing business plan, but if you haven't got the finances to pull that together, to buy the stock, to plant the crops, to invest in the infrastructure, to change it as required, then that just doesn't hold together. Technical ability, financial strength, and then the other 2, which become much more almost softer skill sets that we're looking for, and have really been coming to the fore over the last 3 to 5 years. One is this entrepreneurial mindset, touched on a little bit by Henry. Farmers need to be more than just technically able growers and managers of livestock these days. We need them to have a real business skill about spotting opportunity, adding value at every opportunity, holding cost and managing cost as well. And so that entrepreneurial mindset, always thinking, always re-evaluating where they are. And so we look for that in new tenants. And then finally, environmental growth, and almost 25% of our evaluation of new tenants is that whole environmental growth thinking. Do our prospective new tenants understand the natural capital on the farm? Do they understand how that should be managed to enhance it, to protect it? Have they got understandings about the wider elms activity, etc., so that they bring a fully balanced, holistic approach to the management of their holding when they get that successful opportunity. So that's what we look for in a farm tenant, and that can be anything from almost your traditional dairy farmer through to what could be a CSA bid, and perhaps we'll touch on that in a minute. We're not just looking for the same old anymore. I think we are broadening our vision as to what our estates need, and certainly in Cornwall that is very much our position. So the challenges we face, and again touched on throughout this debate, we have got a reducing area of council farms estates nationally, although Cornwall has committed to hold its estate at 10,800 acres. There will be some sales within that. We will be selling some farmhouses which are too large and too costly to manage. We will sell some farms within the period of the strategy, but in selling farmland, we will then have a commitment to replace it with new opportunities. So we're rolling the assets through rather than keeping a fixed base of the same 10,000 acres. Changing view of food, local origin, local market, much stronger. It's almost since March 2020, isn't it, that people have recognised the value of local food. Change in diet, change in government land management strategy, local authority climate change emergencies. That's really interesting. Suddenly, carbon comes onto the agenda much more than it did before the Cornwall Council's climate change emergency, and we're now looking to understand what is the carbon footprint of individual farms. How can we help those farms improve it? How can we work with our tenants to support them in improving their understanding of farming for carbon and achieving the carbon neutral ambition set by government, by local authorities, and by the NFU. And then equally, the point that Henry was touching on, this whole new Defra incubator pilots, the new starts, and do we look at incubators around, encouraging our existing tenants to build their skill sets so that they can promote themselves and progress off of the estate. So those challenges sit ahead of us. My personal views, and I'm not speaking from a Cornwall's perspective or from an ACES, which is the ACES is a national group, the Association of Chief Estate Surveyors, the rural branch of which sort of oversees, help shape a national strategy around the council farm. So I think we will see more bare land equipped holdings opportunities, because simply the cost of maintaining a large, and we often do have large farmhouses, is just beyond the budgets of council farms, estate and local authorities. And so creating bare land equipped holdings I think will increase. So equip means there'll be a set of farm buildings, or at a smaller horticultural scale, the infrastructure appropriate for that, polytunnels, etc., for internal growing, but no residential property with that. I think there is more scope for small growing opportunities coming, which will create more new entrants onto the estate, which will enable us to support more tenants as opposed to less tenants. That's what worries me, is that we've got less tenants as much as less land. I think there's a clear improved local food market linked by social media, and we've seen that with some of our more creative entrepreneurial tenants are achieving that. There will be a continued commitment to the current council farm opportunity. So what we might all consider to be the traditional council farm model, sort of a 100-acre farm, beef and sheep as a starter for somebody hoping to build their business bigger. There will still be dairy farms within our estate. So that sort of core expectation will still remain there. But I think there'll be more around it. I think there'll be a larger fringe than we've ever had before. And there will be this increasing emphasis on agroecology and farming for carbon. That's coming from the public, that's coming from our members, and that's coming almost from an expectation from the industry. So I see those sorts of changes happening as we move forward. Finally then, what are we looking for as local authorities? And then perhaps I'll try and build in some of the other issues that I've seen coming through in the questions. So we need clear, well thought out business cases from prospective tenants. They need to be rock solid, because we're giving people opportunities to effectively commit themselves long term to a farm, to put all of their finances and their emotions and their personal commitment at risk. And we can't do that without seeing people really having thought it through fully and well evaluated the business case. So well thought out business cases are essential, because we're all putting stuff at risk. Clarity from new entrants about what infrastructure they require is really helpful, and how we as the local authority then support that. Should we as a local authority invest in new infrastructure to support new tenants, and how do we fund that? We want clear evidence of the ability of tenants to manage their enterprises. Again, it's fundamental. I put this carefully in this context. Put food production before the environment in your sales pitch. And when you're talking to us, we need to be absolutely convinced that you can deliver the technical aspects of your farm business and your food production business before then adding to that the added value, the added color, the real sort of nuances of the agroecology aspects that you're bringing. Selling us an agroecology product without the ability to really deliver that through the technical expertise of agronomy and livestock production will not work. Be clear why council farms need you. It's a win-win. Council farms need really good tenants, because that's what makes them really breathe and grow and be vibrant and be exciting. And we want every single one of our tenants to be a success, to promote themselves off of the estate, to build their business, to add employment to their business structure, because that's what we're after. We are after seeing our rural areas in our local communities grow and develop, and it is a win-win. It really is a win-win from our as a land agent of 30 years experience, to be going to some of the farms and to see the growth that's been achieved, to see new employment added to a farm business, to see promotion to move off of the farm that we offered, and to see that people move to a larger estate is really exciting. We've just seen one tenant move from our estate to buy a farm and to move away, but we need to go back a generation, because it was his father that started the first opportunity, and then son joined a business. Son then took another farm on the estate, released the previous farm, and now has built that business to promote off. A real example of what council farms estates can do. So that's really exciting, and it does encourage us as land agents when we see that success. And I think the final thing from my perspective as a council farm manager is that I'm really mindful that we need to be thinking that we need to adjust our offering to meet the new demand. And whilst we have historically said we've got a farm for let, who wants it, I think we much more need to be thinking about who is interested in a farm opportunity, what do they really need, and can we shape what we've got to meet that need? So this supply and demand balance needs to be much more thought out, and we as a landlord need to be shaping a little bit to more what the needs of the local demand is. that's really, Vicki, all that I want to say in this, and really interested to almost pick up questions and explore this through a Q&A session.
Sure.
Because I think that's where there's probably more benefit in this conversation.
No, that was really great. And I gave you a bit more time than I should have done, because I think a lot of people find it really valuable to listen to what you were doing, because the passion that you had coming through and what Cornwall is doing, I think is really insightful and not always mirrored in other places, but really, really useful. And the 4-point plan and your future plans, really interesting. I think one of the things that's been picked up in one of your last slides about the bare land equipped emphasis, which, you know, I'm thinking with the urban food growing and peri-urban food growing could be quite useful, you know, opportunity of land for horticulture enterprises in particular. But the issue of housing in more rural areas, and where housing is not affordable or available, that's going to be a real problem. And a couple of questions have highlighted that housing is a big issue. If bare land opportunities increase, it excludes many young farmers because they need a home. And there's a couple of questions about that.
So Vicki, that's absolutely true. But I think what we found with the farm that we let in that coastal resort is that we had 3 applications for 3 local young farmers who all had existing housing,
right?
And didn't need the house per se. They were after the farm buildings and the land in one ring fence to enable them to bring everything together. So yes, I absolutely accept that in some situations there needs to be a house with a set of farm buildings, but it's not always the case. And certainly large 5-6 bedroom farmhouses are actually more of a debit on the account than a credit on the account in some situations. The cost of heating them, the council tax, are all cost to a business, not just always benefit.
No, I can see that. Somebody suggested selling off the large costly farmhouses and providing smaller, possibly more eco dwellings.
And if we could get the planning system to enable that to happen, that'd be really exciting.
Yes.
There is a new dwellings for old dwellings policy, but it's not helpful. And certainly in Cornwall, it would not be easy just to sell the large house and build a new one as a swap. The countryside is protected from new dwellings, and quite rightly so.
Yes, quite rightly so, but also not possibly an opportunity to sort of for a bit of campaigning to make that work, or more flexible where it needs to be, and should be part of any sort of campaign around the county farms estate and county land. Maybe that's in your report, Graeme. I'm sorry, I haven't seen it.
No, I wonder if I could ask Jonny a question about that. I'm interested, if you've got large farmhouses, is there scope to split them, or indeed some of the farm buildings, you've got traditional model farms, and use the buildings for homes as well, and maybe get a better return from the farm itself, and then obviously split off some of the farmland. So you've basically disaggregated a farm to create opportunities.
So the theoretical around that is absolutely there. So where you've got a large traditional model set of farm buildings, almost a courtyard design, it would be lovely to be able to create 2 new farmhouses and then almost split the farm in half and almost sadly turn around what I've been doing for the last 30 years, which is bringing everything together. But the challenge really is the local authority budget and enabling us to do that and trying to prove the business case. Because whilst we can show we've increased capital value, actually capital value doesn't sort of generate the returns. It sits on the balance sheet, but doesn't actually turn the council's coffers over. But yeah, you're right. And looking at, certainly there are some planning legislation which facilitates that enables that to happen without needing to do full planning applications. But it is a challenge of the finances, really. But that really comes back to the supply and demand. What is it that the new entrants really need, and can we shape our opportunities to meet that?
Does anybody else want to come in that, or I go to another question? There have been a couple. Oh, sorry,
Vicki. No, I was going to say. I mean, I think that'd be interesting. I do think what Henry has to say about that and what we know about new entrants. And I think, given some of the audience, there has been some really good work by Land Workers Alliance done on demand. And I wonder if we've really got a good handle on the demand and what's out there. I know the councils will have had applications, and I'm not sure there's a central log of those, so we know who's out there. But I'd be really interested to know what we might need to do to find out what demand is and how that could help Jonny with the kind of planning for supply.
I suppose our understanding is that demand outstrip supply as such, because I mean, Jonny, you get loads of applicants, don't you?
Yep.
And a lot of very good ones. The issue of housing, I mean, we only know what we're told is the housing is an issue, and I'm not sure if we have any particular ideas how to address it. Interestingly, actually, the sort of incubator we visited at Kingsclere near Basingstoke, and obviously that Basingstoke is a place where property is also very expensive, and the guy who runs the estate was thinking of building some sort of more like student accommodation, because he wanted more young people more young people to come on, and actually providing more sort of communal facilities and more student type accommodation for people in the very sort of early stages, he thought might work. But I mean, I don't know whether it would, but it was sort of interesting. I thought,
okay,
a stepping stone.
There's been a couple of sort of practical questions. I don't know if anybody wants to answer. Is there a support for putting together a business case for a council tenancy? And somebody has asked earlier, where do you find out about council tenancies coming up, or other land opportunities, growing opportunities? Anybody want to answer that? Either of those?
Well, shall I pick up to start, Vicky? So where do you find out about local opportunities in your area from your council farms estate is effectively to contact the land agent responsible for the management of that estate. They may hold a mailing list, and so get on that mailing list, and then you should get regular notifications as farms come through, or they may advertise locally in local papers. But I would go to the land agent responsible for the management of that estate and get on their mailing.
You'd find that out by going to the council?
Yeah, go to the council, local council's website, and it should be accessible through there. Not always easy to get through local authority websites, I know, but if not, ring the mainline number and ask to speak. Now, once the opportunity is there in the public for offering, there is no support for putting together a business plan. You effectively need to drive that yourself, a combination of your own technical skills of business planning, and if some do employ a local agent or a business partner, accountant, to support them in getting the detail together and effectively helping them to challenge the numbers to make sure that their application is really sound. But there isn't financial support out there, because effectively you're bidding into an open market. But that's the route through your local land agent, and then find out when opportunities come around. Interesting enough, we were talking first thing this morning about timings, and it was very clear that in the east of the country, with the arable areas, they're looking at October tenancy starts, whereas the west of the county, the more livestock regions, we tend to be looking at March tenancy starts. So that might just help you to think, and we ought to be thinking sort of 6 to 9 months ahead of that. So that, to recognise the timetable that he's gone through. So a viewing day, viewing day, tender application, shortlisting, interview, and then a period of time to prepare to mobilise to go into the farm. So it doesn't all happen the month before; it's sort of happening 6 months before. So that would be a typical timetable.
Really useful, thank you. And support for putting together a business case. Is there any online tools? Anybody know of any, or? That might be
I must admit, I don't.
Right.
The ones that we tend to see often are coming out of agricultural graduates or graduates generally who've got business planning skills. We're looking for a cash flow, probably a 2-3 year cash flow to show year 1 that starter period, year 2, year 3 into stability, and then understanding what your enterprises are and working through the realities, almost the gross margins that go with each enterprise, building up to give you your overall enterprise business performance, fixed costs, leading then to be able to assess what rent you can pay. So that's what we'd be looking for.
Would you be looking for any environmental or social outcomes specifically from the start?
Well, that's all. I think that's all part of the narrative that we're looking for in that broader story. Yeah, so technical ability, bang on.
Yep.
Here's my business case. Here's my finances. Okay, now tell me about your entrepreneurial skills. Tell me about your environmental thinking, and that all becomes part of that narrative of that bit of your tender. That's right. Yeah.
Okay, we've got a specific question here. It'd be great to understand the logic behind Cornwall Council rolling assets by selling farmland with the promise to buy new farmland. Why is this preferred to holding the farmland and offering it?
Okay, so absolutely.
From Rob.
So what has happened over the last 100 years is that some of our individual farms have become heavily invested to a certain type of farm system. So we have in Cornwall farms which are 100, 150 acres, but really equipped for 250 dairy cows, because previous tenants have invested to build their business to enable them to progress to a larger opportunity on a private estate. When we look at those now, those are very expensive farms for us to maintain and not really great opportunities. So where we can effectively sell that asset and then go out and buy a new set of farmland assets to restart that process, it kind of gives us ability to churn the estate. So that's what we're looking to do, not with every single asset, but in certain situations. Colleagues up and down the country was in our conversation this morning were just saying that they have had situations where tenants have developed really powerful diversified business plans, and the only way they could progress and grow those to increase the local rural employment or the scope of that business was by buying the asset. And again, so the council selling to a really successful tenant and then taking the proceeds to buy new assets to start the process again. It's a powerful model. It's a rolling model. It's good. We would call it good asset management from a commercial property management perspective. It kind of feels a little bit counter. I don't know what Graeme's views are on it, but there are strong grounds for it, I would say.
Okay, Graeme, do you want to
come in there? Yeah, I would love to. I mean, I think that's a really interesting point, because when obviously some of the workshop we did with tenants, one of the issues is, you develop a business model that works in a particular location. If we want people to be selling local food and delivering to a local market, if you develop that over 5 years of a startup tenancy, but then find you have to move or can't carry on, then you suddenly lost that market, or have to rebuild that somewhere else. So there are, and similarly, if it's a care farm or something similar. So I think there's a really interesting question about how can you help people to be more viable through things like a local supply chain, and how does that fit with what you're trying to do on the farm? So I do think that rolling model makes sense. And obviously I think, there's a question about, even I know that Hollywood, the Ecological Land Cooperative actually offer a buy. They enable people to buy the land on a very, initially on a very long lease, and to buy it out eventually. So there is something to explore there, I think. I guess there's a question about whether it matters where the farms are and how available they are, whether you can get the farms you need in good locations. Maybe if they're peri-urban ones, that's very precious land at risk of other forms, wrong kind of development. Is that something you need to hold on to for different reasons, because it's near to a very large population, census population, for the reasons Kim outlined?
Anybody else want to come in on that issue? No. I was going to note that Ollie has put a note in the chat. He's got model business plans as well as loads of other planning application resources. ecologicalland.co. Co-op. Anyway, it's in the chat, so I hope people can look at that. Ollie, I don't know if you wanted to come in on the issue of this sort of the planning and councils having the clout to make things happen. Did you want to say anything about that? Don't know if you want to come in. Maybe he can't. Possibly can't in this format of Zoom. That's my bad there. Sorry about that. There's lots of good chat and insight coming on the chat. So everybody do have a look at that. Quite a lot of things around housing again, and somebody said great work being done by Cornwall, but affordable housing is a big issue. And the idea of a one planet development policy. How would that provide a really coherent package that really embraces the county farm estate, developing really long-term vision for local food systems? Is there anything you could say about the one planet development policy? Jonny, or have you frozen?
Yeah, no, I'm not frozen.
All right, so I'm thinking on it.
Yes, I am indeed.
Yeah. Anybody else have thoughts about that? Because obviously coherence in policy is critical at a local level. And as Graeme, you mentioned the local nature strategic planning that's going to have to happen, local nature recovery strategies, linking in with the county farm estate will be really valuable, but also with possible health policies, mental and physical health, and better eating policies, and obviously climate and nature and all that kind of thing. There's a coherence that these estates could really provide, as you noted and as Kim noted.
Yeah, I did, just to come back on that. I mean, obviously I'm aware of it in Wales, and you know, I think very question whether that could fly in England at the moment. But I think what's interesting is, and this is a personal view, you know, is there a model of smaller farms that function longer term rather than starter farms? And we know that sort of works for horticulture. And what might the model be to have a sort of crofting model? I know I've seen some really interesting developments in between Glasgow and Edinburgh where they have a sort of crofting forestry model where people have a work home unit, and you've got a very different model of how you might have maybe kind of liminal development around towns, because currently the model is there's a kind of quite strong divide between a town edge and the rural area around it, but might there be a softer model where you could have that food production on smaller sites? I think we're just in a phase where the viability of those is being tested more, and how those might work at different scales, I think. So we know CSAs and small horticulture works, but is there an interim scale model that really works, or are we really in a world of very large farms that work, you know, financially, and then very small ones that work financially for different reasons? And I think that's a kind of ongoing challenge, if I can put it that way. But that's very much a personal view. But I think we, you know, we may need to rethink what that urban edge looks like, and how it can be farmed in a different way. And maybe the advantages, you can have diversification, access to people, community, different income streams, etc., through that model.
That's interesting. I mean, my colleague Rob was talking at a session yesterday on peri-urban farming and talking about the edge effects. You know, the crossover between two sets of land use can be a really rich place for developing multiple outcomes and innovation. Kim, I don't know if you want to say anything on that, or
not too much, but the session that I was in before this one was all about connecting the urban and rural, and these similar themes were being talked about, how the peri-urban being a space where not just necessarily around land and food and farming, but also just like connecting people and building those relationships which have been quite broken between urban and rural communities, so they can understand each other better and then work on localized food systems better. So just brings that to mind.
Okay, thank you. Well, we've only got 2 more minutes, so can I give anybody a chance to say a final point if you haven't said yet, or respond to any of the questions or chat? Does anybody want to say anything? Henry, you've unmuted yourself. Did you want to say something?
Not particularly. There don't seem to be a lot of questions for me. I'm feeling very unloved.
I'm sorry. You are loved. We're very excited about what's coming, believe me. The new entrance ambitions of Defra really, really welcome, and we're really interested to see what's happening. So don't feel unloved. I think the Cornwall example is sort of really impressive and exciting to hear from. So it's slightly dominated, and I think we'd all probably like to see a similar passion and coherent approach across England in particular, but obviously people are talking about Welsh examples as well. But does anybody else want to give final words?
I just absolutely second that. I think what Jonny's shown us and is doing in Cornwall is brilliant, and we've got some case studies in our report that pick up on what Jonny's doing. There's a really interesting biomethane project where that convening power is coming to life with capturing fugitive methane from farm slurry pits. It was a very technical response to climate change and net zero, but really brilliant stuff. I think the question then is, how can we spread this across the wider council farm estates, and can we get the government buy-in? I don't mean Henry, because I think he's very engaged with it and doing brilliant things, but the wider buy-in to sustain investment, reset the purposes, and really cherish these assets for the future. We don't want to see them disappear, and they're doing they could do so much more, and are doing many important things, as Jonny has made clear. So I think that for us is the challenge of getting our vision out there. Do look out for it. Do email me if you'd like a copy of it. Very happy.
Do read the report. Get in touch with Graeme via Hova or other tools. So great report, and please do support that work. I think we're going to be cut off any minute now. Thank you very much to the speakers, everybody who came. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks.
And,
thank you, Vicki. Thanks.
Onward.
Great to see you. Thanks for the session, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.